Excellent. Thank you, Brian. Hopefully everyone's able to hear me all right. Welcome to the webcast on Maximo configurations we love and hope you do too. This is the first time we've done a webcast that's kind of like that, like this topic. I mean, we've done many in the past that cover a very specific kind of educational need, maybe an application like workflow or app designer or something like that. So this is the first time that we've actually done one that's a little bit more broad and focused on just kind of some general configuration. So I really hope that you guys find it valuable. Just transition my slides here. In terms of myself, Brian already mentioned I've got about 17 years of Maximo implementation experience, predominantly with the base Maximo, oil and gas, HSE, utilities, transportation, and spatial. Those are the applications or the industry solutions I'm working with the most. And one of the things I love to hear about is cool things you can do with Maximo. So I'm sharing some of the things that I think we've done. If you've done some cool things, I'd always love to hear about it. Obviously, that's something I'm passionate about, learning what kind of business needs can be solved by some type of neat or interesting configuration. In terms of my agenda, I'll cover a couple things here. First, I'll go through the purpose of the webcast. I'll cover a bit of the purpose of the webcast. I am going to talk a little bit about configurations versus customizations. We've in the past done a complete webcast on that topic alone, just trying to define or distinguish between a configuration and a customization. Most people in the Maximo community would call customizations no-nos, so we'll just kind of talk about what is a configuration, what is a customization, because I'm going to be presenting something, that falls, in my opinion, mostly under the configuration side, but I'll kind of clarify that when I get to that topic. And then from there, I've got a bit of a configuration overview. So what I've done is I've selected just 10 different configurations that I thought were kind of unique, kind of interesting, solved certainly a business need, and what I've done is I've just kind of created a couple slides for each one, and again, hopefully you find that useful. While I was going out and collecting these topics, there was actually far more than 10, so I tried to pick the ones that I thought were useful, but started to think that maybe, if this session is valuable, maybe I do something like this like twice a year or something. And at the end, what I'll do is I'll leave it open to any questions and answers. So in terms of the couple of details, the purpose of this session, as I mentioned, is just to share some ideas on the configurations that we've performed in past projects. I was trying to be selective in terms of what I chose for some of these configurations. I tried to really pick smaller solutions. I don't want, we've got a website, we've got a page on our website for deployed solutions. They're typically larger items, major integrations and major configurations that certainly solve a business need. But what I tried to focus on here was smaller items. These are, 1 day or a week type configurations. They're not massive in nature, but provide a lot of value. I didn't want to go with something that was just overly complicated and several man-months to make that happen. I'm not planning on covering the technical details here. I might talk about some of the solution components. Obviously, each of these has a design document and as-built behind them and so forth, but the purpose of this is just to give you guys a bit of an overview, give you guys some ideas. I'm not planning on touching on the details here, at least the technical details. My focus was really, when I selected these, was on the business value or the solution value, not the complexity. So again, I really tried to say, okay, there's a problem. I don't want to find the thing that was the hardest for us to overcome, required a massive amount of code, or it's a really complicated query or report. I didn't want to choose those. I was more interested in, hey, did you get a lot of business value out of it? Did you get a lot of solution value out of it? More so than the actual complexity. I'm sure you guys don't want to just hear about the hardest stuff that we've done, and that type of stuff. And if there's any follow-ups needed, technical follow-up details or whatever, I will put my contact information up at the end. So, feel free to reach out to me and be happy to help you out. So just to touch on configuration versus customization a bit, and again, this has been, a separate 1-hour webcast that we've done in the past, so I don't want to kind of recycle that, but I think it's important to ground some of this conversation for what I'm going to be showing you. This first slide breaks it into what I'll call 2 easy categories, configurations and customizations. My next slide adds kind of a layer of gray to that, so I'll kind of touch on that. But let's kind of talk about what we would typically say a configuration is. So a configuration within Maximo is typically performed with a Maximo standard tool, typically performed online. So for those of you who are involved in some of the configuration of Maximo, you're familiar with application designer and database configuration and escalations and workflow and so forth. Those are some of those standard tools that I'm referring to. Maximo is aware of those changes and knows that you've made those changes because you're using the tool set that's part of the Maximo framework. They typically require no programming, and I will separate a little bit SQL from that. I'm going to refer to SQL for the purposes of this slide as a query language and not a programming language. And I'm sure there's an argument to be had there, but many of the configurations in Maximo at least require SQL, but I'm trying to separate SQL from, for example, Java programming. The configurations are very likely to be upgradable with new Maximo versions. I say very likely. I mean, since I've been doing this for 17 years, I can for sure name some configurations that didn't migrate. But the assumption is that, hey, if Maximo's aware of it, we use the Maximo tools, it should be upgradable. When I move from 7.1 to 7.5 or 7.5 to 7.6 or 7.6 to 7.next or whatever it is, the assumption is that that should be upgradable. And typically, configurations are maintained by Maximo super users or administrators. So, the sustainment teams, your system admins, they can typically maintain most of those configurations. On the customization side of the fence, we're going to say those modify Maximo with outside tools. So you're using programming toolkits predominantly, but you might be using other outside tools that are modifying Maximo. Of course, if you use an outside tool to modify Maximo, Maximo is not necessarily or likely not aware of that change. It typically requires programming, or probably more specifically Java programming. It will require some level of investigation when you're performing an upgrade. I mean, anytime you do what we'd call a customization, and I'll elaborate that a bit more on the next slide, we would suggest that as an upgrade's occurring, you're going to have to go through, itemize those, and take a look at them, figure out if the new version can allow you to collapse it, make sure that it does actually migrate and Maximo's aware, make sure it doesn't break any logic, yada, 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 so that you can move to the next version. And typically, those customizations are maintained by Java developers or programmers. Okay, so that, I think, is pretty straightforward. On the right, we try to avoid those customizations. On the left, that's kind of the stuff that's in play. And now what I'll do is I'll kind of add another layer in there. So again, I'm going to still work left to right here, or I'll start with the configurations. Again, configurations, to be more specific, I put some examples of what we call configurations that I think most Maximo consultants would agree with. And this is where we get into a gray area, because some of this stuff, I mean, I could grab literally 10 senior Maximo consultants, lock them in a room for a day, and I'm not sure everyone would ever agree on every single configuration, customization, and particularly the stuff that's in the middle of this slide, but I'm trying to just ground it for the purposes of this presentation. So configurations, adding attributes to the database using dbconfig, screen changes using application designer, absolutely, those are configurations. Adding new relationships to objects. So if you're creating new relationships, which could be used in a variety of different places depending on what you're using. Things like crossovers, conditional expressions, escalations, workflows, custom views, we would consider those, again, for the purposes of this, to be configurations. And I'm sure there's someone on the other side of this call saying, well, you could certainly use an escalation and launch a customized. Sure, I understand that. But again, in general, those are typically what we would consider to be configuration tools. On the far right, customizations, again, what we consider a customization is changing the business logic or validation of the system. So you're changing the core code. When you normally click this button, Maximo wants to perform that function, and I've changed that through a Java class extension or through a new Java class or whatever, so that now it does something different when I click that button. And again, there's a gray area in the middle here I'll talk about, but typically Java class extensions, new Java classes, custom Maximo objects, Java field validators or listeners, those are what we're going to consider to be customizations. Again, typically requires Java programming, and that's kind of what we're going to say is the customization side. And in the middle is what I'll call the gray area. And, there's probably a lot more you could put in here, particularly even in the area of integration, but I haven't really talked about that because it's not relevant to my topic. But cloned applications, right? So most people would say, well, I can clone or duplicate an application out of the box using application designer, which is true. It's an out-of-the-box move, but you can't undo it. So once you've cloned an application, you can't decide later on to kind of retract or delete the application. So it kind of pushes you into a realm that I'd say is in the gray area. And then probably by far the bigger one is automation scripts. So since they were released, a lot of things are becoming automation scripts. In some cases, things that probably shouldn't be. There's a lot of people who aren't aware of all the tools that are available to them, and as a result, they're doing more automation scripts than they should be. But automation scripts is, it's an envelope or a box where you can put your Java code, and Maximo's aware of it, so it will upgrade it. It'll bring that box from version to version, but it doesn't guarantee anything as to what's inside that it'll work. And even within automation scripts, there's a huge pendulum. On one side, you can use them to kind of replicate or change business logic. That would be very much, I would say, a customization. And on the other side, you may use an automation script simply as a means to attach a launch point to an out-of-the-box action. So there's a huge, huge range there, but I wanted to point these out because all my slides that I've got after this now, when I go through these configurations, I have nothing that falls into the far right category. I have several that fall into the middle, and they're all automation scripts. And then I have several that are just straight up configurations. So just to be completely clear, again, automation scripts, I'll leave it to you to decide whether that's a customization or not. I think the reality is if you want to do a lot of interesting things with Maximo these days, you're probably going to at some point run into some automation scripts whether you like it or not. Okay. So to jump into some of the configurations now, and again, I've just got 10 of them, and I'll just kind of go one by one. The first one I'll kind of present is a scan and attach solution. I thought this one was really, really cool. So what this was is we had several clients that deal with lots of paper, unfortunately. They still today have check sheets. They still have forms they need to fill out. Some of them even have sketches. They have to actually draw an area. Maybe they had a leak or something like that. They have to actually, draw out what that location looks like from an aerial perspective. So they've come back to their office, workplace, whatever it is, with a pile of paper and their completed work order. And what they had to do in the old days is they'd go up to the scanner and they'd scan them one by one, email them to their email. That's typically what they'll do, particularly with these photocopiers, slam it all in the feeder, email it to yourself. They'd open their email, they'd right-click it, they'd save it to a folder. Then they proceed to open up Maximo, they'd log in, they'd open up the work order screen, search for their work order, open their work order, and then one by one attach their documents. So, 10 minutes later, they have completed that work order with those attached documents. So what this solution was doing was allowing them to simply use the email listener in Maximo. So down below, I've kind of put a screenshot. It's probably a bit small to read, but they can just send an email now. So like, for example, attach work order at, I've got ontracks.com in my example. In the subject, they put their work order number and attach all the files they want. Hit send, and 30 seconds later, Maximo grabs all of those attachments and attaches it to that record. So it's very, very quick, very simple. You could do it with a picture. You could be sitting there with your phone, take a picture, email a picture, just using the same email address, put the work order number in the subject line, it attaches the record. The other thing you'll notice if you do a lot of attaching in Maximo is it's one by one. Like you have to go add new attachments, navigate to the file, pick one, hit OK, do the next one. Like you can't hold down control or scan, grab many records at once. Whereas using this method, you can. You can attach 10 documents to the email and hit send. So it's a very efficient way. And what most people are actually doing with this is they do it right from that photocopier. So they put their documents in the feeder. They put in the to address instead of what they used to do, which was send to themselves. They send to that address. In the subject, they put the work order. They hit scan. The scanner scans it all, sends it, and then 30 seconds later, they're in Maximo. They didn't even have to log into the program. So very, very beneficial, fairly straightforward, and something that I thought was kind of cool. The next one, and actually I probably should point out on the top right, I have indicated whether it's a configuration or customization. That triangle there is indicating this is in that gray area because this one does use an automation script. The second one is a saved query manager. So for any of you who are probably more on the system administration side, this is probably where it's going to add more value. But the reality is inside of Maximo today, you can only change your own saved query. So if you've gone and created a saved query, you can change your saved query, but you can't change others' saved queries. And what a lot of companies have in place is rules that suggest that, hey, we don't log into our production system as Max admin, because then we lose all traceability. I don't know who logged in, who made changes. So we have the people who support our system. They log in under their own usernames, their own passwords, and they make whatever changes they do to production, right? What happens is, of course, these people create queries, and those queries are used on things like start centers for result sets. There's things like default queries or whatever. And invariably, these people end up, getting promoted, leaving the company or whatever. And those queries are no longer editable because that was that user's query and it's locked down to that user. Or in other cases, we have people creating saved queries, which is fine. Go create a saved query for whatever you're looking for, but they're not tuned. They're not efficient queries. Maybe you were starting to notice through our logging that there's some queries that are taking a long time to run, and maybe those are saved queries. They need tuning. They may not have the skills to do that tuning. So the solution for this one was to build a new application to manage saved queries. It's available to system administrators, and you can actually manage them. So I've got a couple screenshots here. So in the top left is the application interface. So it's a saved query manager. It's got just it's a typical Power App. It's got a list tab. It has a query tab. Once you find the query you're looking for through whatever search you did, you would open it up like I have here, and it's showing me my query name, the application that this query has been built within, the object it's using, the owner of the query, and then my description and where clause for that query. And then what we allow is an edit and validate button. So if you click the edit button, it unlocks the query. I think with the exception of the owner, I believe that's controlled by the MBO, but the rest, you can change descriptions. Where clauses is probably the most common one. You go and make your changes to the where clause. Click the validate button when you're done. And what that will do is it will run and launch that query as that query owner and then display back any type of errors that there are. Okay, so very, very efficient application. Find the query, hit edit, make the changes, hit validate, save it, and away you go. In the bottom right, there's a Save Query Manager. On the Save Query Manager, there's a default tab. And what that's going to show me is the users that are using that query as their default query. So this was just a good check to say, hey, some people might have a default query that is this query. And if I'm changing it, that may affect them. And I can very quickly see, okay, who's heavily relying on this query by looking through that list. So again, just a simple application, helps do what's not there out of the box. Number three, again, probably more on the system administration side, and I've got a bit of both throughout this deck, is a workflow mass update. So the problem here is for those of you who are using workflows, whether you're routing purchase orders, purchase requests, work orders, management of change records, whatever it is, those, if you have an active workflow and you have an active assignment, and that person no longer is able to deal with the assignment. So let's say they went on vacation for 2 weeks and forgot to tell someone or put a delegate in the system. Maybe they left the company. Maybe they've been promoted. Those workflows are now tied to that individual. And there is a mechanism in Maximo to one by one open the workflows and reassign them. But there's no mass update where I can just say, hey, this person replaced that person, send all their stuff to that person. Or this person forgot to, update their delegate before vacation, send it all to that person. This tool also allows the ability to mass start or mass stop a workflow. And again, there's a lot of administration reasons to doing that. But, for example, maybe I've loaded a bunch of work orders in waiting approval, and I want them all now pushed into a workflow. I can go grab them all, mass start a workflow for all of them. Or maybe I've got a bunch of work orders that are in a workflow, and I've now introduced a new iteration of that workflow. I want to stop it and then push them all back in so that they're now in the new version of the workflow, not the old version. So this solution allows for all of those scenarios. So to just give you, a bit of a walk through the application, we've got a screen, the traditional workflow administration screen. So this is the out-of-the-box Maximo workflow screen. And then on the left-hand side, and the more actions, it's going to show me my options. I can bulk workflow reassign. I can do a bulk workflow stop or a bulk workflow start. So it gives me those three options. From there, if I were to click, say, the reassignment, what it will do is it'll open up a dialog. I can say, hey, I'm moving from this person to that person. So in this case, maybe Mr. Wilson's no longer with the company and he's going to be replaced by Tori. I'm going to say that person to that person. And I can do everything, all workflows, or I can even filter by object. I might say, well, in this particular scenario, Wilson, is just no longer in maintenance, but I want all of his purchase requests and purchase orders to stay with him because those are still relevant. I could say I only want to move the work orders over, not everything. But depending on what I want, I can do everything or select objects. And then I can even have a where clause. So I could even say, hey, I only want the work orders in that status moved, or I only want the work orders in that area moved because maybe they've changed some of the jurisdictions that this person's managing or what have you. After I hit the execute button, it tells me that, 7 out of 7 workflows were reassigned, so it does that complete reassignment for me, and that's it, away it goes. Another scenario is the bulk start. Same concept, I want to find an object and a process this time, and say, hey, I want a bulk start or bulk stop, depending on which function I invoke, a bunch of records. I can come in and say, hey, find all the work orders like this that are in that process and start them or stop them, and same thing, hit the execute button, and Maximo will do that move and move everything out. So if any of you are involved in administration, particularly workflow administration, you're probably well aware of the pains of having to manage these when people are on vacations or leave the company or whatever, to be able to update them. So this is a very useful tool for that. Configuration 4 is it's almost an external to Maximo, but here's a problem a lot of people have is we've got a bunch of Maximo environments, our dev, test, QA, train, prod, whatever they are. The URLs, people, you got to bookmark them or try to remember. Sometimes you go to them and it's not turned on. You didn't know the QA was down or whatever. And then there's a bunch of other information that you want to transmit to people. So what this is really just a JS, like a page, a web page that you can go to that's going to show you the up-down status for each of your environments, for both the Maximo system as well as the database, and links to commonly used tools. And it's just really, really useful, particularly for system admin folks, but not exclusively. And this is kind of showing a screen capture of what that would look like. So you have a list of all your Maximo systems. So here's my production environment, test, dev, and train. And then it's going to show me what's the status. So it's saying, okay, Maximo is up and the database is up. So what it's doing is in the background, it's doing essentially an HTTP call. And if it gets returned, I think it's a status code of 200, it's good. And if not, it's saying it's not up. And it's just very, just auto-refreshing every minute or whatever you set that to. And it's telling me the environment status. But also probably more important to the user, I don't have to remember all these login URLs or create a ton of bookmarks. I bookmark this one page, and then I just click on the login page link, and bang, it's going to open prod or test or dev or train or whatever my different environments are. If I want to see the log files, I have links for that. If you're someone involved in maybe reporting or SQL, you might want the database connection string. Well, there it is. If you're involved in the integration, maybe you want to know where the integration framework folder is. So all of that useful information just at your fingertips. Again, pretty straightforward, not even really based on Maximo. It's almost external to Maximo, but gives you a lot of useful information. Along the bottom, maybe listing contacts. Again, useful for people. Hey, wait a minute, the server is down. Who do I contact? Here's the people to contact. Some important links over to the right. Maybe you want to create a ticket for the help desk, look at the company's SharePoint site, release calendars, open a SQL editor, whatever it is. Training materials, you can create links to that. Whatever, again, is beneficial to your company, but just kind of one landing page that shows you all of your environments as well as their current status that you can use to just navigate appropriately. Number 5, probably the toughest for me to actually demo, but I think it's very, very beneficial, and I know there's a few companies using this report that would agree with me. But what this allows you to do, it's an inventory balance details report. It allows you to check the inventory balance and inventory value at any point in time. So Maximo doesn't persist today, like if you have a warehouse or a storeroom and it's got a bunch of parts in it, it doesn't persist that, hey, last week at this day it had that much in your storeroom. It doesn't. I mean, you could perform a calculation that would essentially say, okay, multiply the quantities of these items by their costs and give me an output. But what this does is it allows you to go back in time. So I can go back and say, hey, maybe my year end was December 31. Mid-January, the accountants call me up and go, hey, we need to know what the inventory balance was on December 31. I can go to this report, put in December 31, and it will show me the inventory value on that day. Essentially what it does is it takes out all of the issues, returns, adjustments, inserts during that period and backs it up to give you an accurate representation of the inventory at that point in time. This report also allows you to put a date range in and show all of the transactions. So I can actually go in and say, well, maybe I don't want just December 31, maybe I want December 1st to 31st. I can get a value for each of those days, And then more importantly, I can get all of the transactions along the way. Maybe I want to do a validation and make sure that that makes sense. I can see all of the ins, all of the outs, inserts, receipts, adjustments, and so forth during that period by day. So again, very, very useful report, particularly if you're involved in any type of financial, interaction, and you need to be able to figure out what the balance was at any given point in time. So again, entirely a configuration. It's all done in the reporting side. So there is kind of a bit of a layer of abstraction between Maximo and that reporting tool. Number 6, this might be the simplest configuration in here. It's entirely a configuration. There's no automation scripts or anything like that on this. But what the problem was, work is being executed. People are doing work orders, and there's maybe no knowledge of PMs or related work. So maybe someone drives out to a station or a site or a facility or whatever it is. They do their work order. They come back, and then invariably a PM kicks out the next day to go back to the same spot. It's like, oh man, I was just there. I could have grouped it all together. Now, Maximo does have the ability to view work details. Like if you go next to the location or asset in the work order screen, you can open up and see other work orders or other PMs. And this is really just putting it a little bit more in your face. It's taking some of that same content, but putting it directly on the work order tracking screen, and then even adding other related records depending on what your organization is using Maximo for. So it's really just a simple table that shows you work orders, PMs, other relevant records just at the bottom of the work order screen. So as soon as someone goes in, puts in a work order, puts in a location or an asset, it's going to show you here's all their work orders, here's all the upcoming PMs right in your face. I don't have to do several mouse clicks to get there. So this is kind of showing what those windows look like at the bottom of the screen. Of course, you only have one. I'm just showing the 2 different tabs. But you would, at the bottom of the screen, I open up an asset. It would show me all the work orders at that same asset. Had I picked just the location, it would just show me the work orders at that location. So it's going to show me here's all of the records there. It's actually a very efficient query. When we first built this, we were worried that it would take a long time to run. We had a customer with many millions of work orders in the work order table, but actually I can confirm that it was absolutely no issue at all. It very instantly opens up all of those work orders. So I can very quickly see that. The upcoming PMs, here's all the upcoming PMs for, again, this asset or location. This particular screen capture, this company was also using management of change records, so MOCs. They wanted to be able to see, hey, if there's an asset or a location that's currently undergoing some type of change, we want to show that on the screen. And they were also using the Maximo operator logging, the control room application. So if there's someone in a control room making comments or notes related to this asset or location, thought, hey, that would be valuable for a technician as well. So again, super simple, all configuration, and just shows you right on your screen, here's all of the related records without me having to do several mouse clicks, several queries, or what have you. Configuration number 7 is related to syncing purchase requests and reservations. So here's the problem. If you use work orders today and you're using Maximo for some or all of your supply chain, when you go into a work order and you plan your materials, and I need these parts, this valve, this gasket, this impeller, whatever it is, when your work order gets approved, it's going to create a material reservation if you have the stuff in a storeroom. And if you don't, it's going to create a purchase requisition. That's out-of-the-box Maximo functionality. Well, in a lot of companies, they schedule after it gets approved, or even if you schedule before you get approved, the schedules change. And the problem is, if I change a schedule, and I was originally going to do this job on February the 1st, and now I need to do it on February the 15th, if I change my scheduled dates, Maximo does not, out of the box, adjust my material reservations or my purchase request. So it's either going to show up way too early, which we potentially could use that capital elsewhere, or we didn't have to expedite or whatever, or if you pull the work order forward, it's actually going to pull forward the reservation for you, right? So it'll actually bring it closer to you. If I decide that, hey, it's no longer going to be end of February, it's going to be start of February, it would actually bring that closer and communicate that information automatically to the supply chain side of the system through that reservation or through that purchase request. So there's not much to show here, but if you use like a scheduling tool or you just update dates directly on the work order, as you change that scheduled start, scheduled finish date, it automatically updates your reservations and purchase requests to keep everything synchronized. And again, this uses an automation script in the background to perform that particular update. Number 8 is to send emails with some PDF attachments. So there's been a couple different variations of this, and I've put them both there. But one of the problems is, we have purchase orders in Maximo. When the purchase order is approved or ready to be sent to the vendor, we have to kind of do a bit of the hokey pokey to get it into a PDF and send it to them. So we have to launch the report, save as, save it to a folder, open your email, yada, yada, and then eventually send it on down. Or the second scenario here is we have a technician who wants the work order details report. They're on the road. They're not in front of their computer. They're moving from site to site or whatever it is, and they want the work order report because it has a whole bunch of details. It might have route stops and the job plan and materials and all that kind of stuff. They want that automatically sent to them. So the solution here was to use a communication template to be able to send the email and have some stock information in the email message, but more importantly, automatically PDF a report and attach it to that communication template. So this next slide kind of shows how that works. So on the top left, I've got a PO screen. Just below that, a work order again for the 2 variations. But on the PO, I have a button that says Send PO to Vendor. When I hit that button, it's going to take a predefined communication template that presumably has a nice elegant subject and message body and all that good stuff. But attached to it, it gives them the full purchase order details report so that they have the full PO with all the terms and conditions and all that good stuff that aren't really feasible to put inside of a communication template. The one below, same concept. Maybe I want to send a work order to the technician, hit the button, depending on how you do your assignments, maybe the lead or whatever field. It's going to take that work order, again, your message, whatever your email message is, and here's just a sample of it. It's going to send your communication template, the normal communication template, but it's going to attach automatically to it the work order details report, which again, presumably will give them more information as to the work that needs to be done. But I mean, the variation, you can use this on any records. Could be a management of change record, could be a PR, could be, doesn't matter. It's essentially an auto script that we're using to automatically package up in PDF a report and attach it to a communication template. So again, pretty useful if you just want to send that type of stuff out. Number 9 is kind of sticking with the communication template theme a little bit. So for those of you who do send emails from Maximo, there's an out-of-the-box tool for communication templates to build out your email content and do things like bind variables and all that good stuff. And then, you can use those in a variety of different places, whether it's a button, a workflow, or whatever to send. The problem is, in a lot of cases, you want to send a list in that email inside that communication template. So, for example, maybe a user gets deactivated, they left the company, and I want to send, a list of all the PMs that are assigned to them, all the work orders that are assigned to them, all the reports they have scheduled or whatever in an email, okay? A communication template doesn't support that. It just, bind variables will give you one field, one attribute related to the record. Like I can give you the PO status in there, but I can't give you a list of things. That's just something that doesn't work. Even if the bind variable had a many or a one-to-many, Maximo just kind of randomly grabs one or seemingly randomly grabs one. It doesn't work. You could use a report for this, absolutely. You could probably schedule a report or something like that. Of course, having it launch automatically based on another status might be a bit of a challenge. But the problem is reports are also a bit too heavy. I mean, you're going to have to build a report from scratch. They're not very flexible, whereas a communication template, we have front-end tooling. It's all kind of out-of-the-box components. So the solution here was we built a table generator application that was created to build that relationship between a parent and child objects, and then use that relationship in our communication template to send a list. So I want to send you a list of all work orders that are assigned to you next week. I can do that using this application. I can't do that out of the box using a communication template. So to give you just a bit of a walkthrough, we have a table generator application. This is essentially where we create our one-to-many relationship. In this case, excuse me, I'm showing the parent object is the user table. It's going to be related to a work order table, so maybe I want to see all the work orders assigned to a person. It has a header, the detail in the footer, so that's going to create essentially a table, and I'll show you that here in a second. But the header says what columns do you want to show. It uses HTML code, so you can make it bold or red or whatever you want. You can put the detail in, you can put a footer in, depending on what you're looking for. And then what happens is inside the communication template application, where you would normally create a bind variable, we're going to bind it to this table generator record. So basically this one's saying, hey, when this person leaves, I want to get all their PMs that are reassigned, all the work orders that need to be reassigned, and all the report schedules that need to be removed. Here's my bind variables. And then what that looks like when it sends is it sends the email and then gives me my lists, right? So it's going to say this user has left the company. Here's all the stuff you need to deal with. It's got list 1, list 2, list 3, list 4, which of course is not out-of-the-box functionality. You can't create lists inside of communication templates otherwise. So again, very useful, very lightweight, all done using, and once that relationship's built, I mean, the other benefit, that you don't get with the report is if you build the relationship, for example, between a user and a work order, you can continuously call upon that in many different communication templates. You don't have to build net new reports and schedules and all that stuff. And then last, but certainly not least, the auto-updating of start centers. So for any of you who are involved in configuring, managing, changing start centers, you'll obviously be aware that once the start center gets updated, and you want to push that out to users, you can't do it automatically. Like you can send a notification to users saying get a new start center. So the way it works is, let's say your company has a static start center that they want all technicians to have, or all managers to have, or all approvers to have. You build one start center, it looks a certain way, and you push it out to your users. That's fine. First time they log in, they get that. Well, let's say 3 weeks later you add a new field or want to change the start center or the result set or something on the start center. If you make a change to that start center, you make the change, that's fine, but the user doesn't automatically get those changes. They have to knowingly go and click the Update Start Center link, and then that will refresh their Start Center with the new version. I can say from experience, no matter how many emails you send to people to do it, some people just don't do it, and maybe what happens now is they're working off an old Start Center template. So they call the help desk, they're not seeing what they thought they should see or whatever, and it's because they're on an old version. What this allows you to do is push it out. Say, okay, that's fine, I've made a change. I'm not going to ask you to update it. I'm going to literally push that out to you as a user, and you're going to inherit those changes automatically. So this kind of shows how it's built. It's built within the security groups application, because a security group is what ties a group of people, obviously, to a start center. And then what it is on the users tab, we've added a checkbox, so you can pick all of the users or just select users, depending on what you're doing. Once you've picked the ones that you want to have their start centers updated, you go to the Update Selected Start Centers button. It's a new button. Click that button, and a system message is presented back, right? So it's going to then, based on what you selected, come back and say, hey, it was updated with the following messages. I just showed the 3 variations in this message so you could see it. But the first one says, Start Center not found for user S. Miller. Reason is that person's never logged into Maximo, so Maximo first builds their start center when they logged in, so I can't update something that they don't have. They will get the correct one when they choose to log in, so that's no problem. And then it says updated my start center, that's great. And then if you have someone who's logged in, says user B. Smith is currently logged in, unable to update it, they have to be not logged in for us to be able to perform this function. That's fine, it gives me the error. I know some people didn't get it. Maybe I scheduled to do it again off hours, try again tomorrow, whatever I want to do, but at least it gives me that feedback so that I know that not necessarily everybody has been updated. And with that, I'm at 40 minutes after, which I think was kind of where I was supposed to about end, and then leave some time for any questions. So maybe I'll just turn it back to Brian quickly, and he can kind of open it up to questions if any of you have any questions on these or other configurations.